How well do you know the people who live next to you? You might know their car. Maybe you know what time they leave for work, or the name of their dog. You exchange pleasantries, a quick wave, a polite nod across the lawn. They are a fixed part of your daily landscape, as familiar and unremarkable as the mailbox at the end of your driveway. But what do you really know? What happens when the door closes? What secrets are kept behind those drawn curtains? We build our homes to be sanctuaries, fortresses against the dangers of the outside world. We lock our doors, we draw our blinds, but we never stop to think that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are already inside the gates. They're separated from you by nothing more than a few inches of drywall, a wooden fence, a shared wall. Tonight, we're peeling back the veneer of suburban tranquility. These aren't tales of distant ghosts or mythical creatures. These are 3 allegedly true stories about the person next door, and the horrifying discovery that they were a monster in plain sight. Our first story begins with a young woman named Clara. After years of saving up, she finally moved into her first solo apartment. It wasn't much, a 3rd-floor walk-up in an older building, but it was hers. It was her sanctuary. The building was quiet, mostly filled with older residents who kept to themselves. All except for one, Mr. Abernathy, from the apartment directly across the hall. He was the first person to greet her, a frail-looking man in his late 70s, with watery eyes and a smile that seemed permanently etched onto his face. He helped her with a box of heavy books on her first day, chiding her gently for not asking for help. It was sweet. He seemed like a lonely grandfather figure. In the first few weeks, his interactions were harmless. A good morning in the hallway, a comment about the weather. Then they became more specific. "You were out late last night, Clara," he'd say, his smile never wavering. "I hope you had a nice time." Clara would offer a polite, if slightly unnerved, smile back. How did he know? She'd gotten home after midnight. Surely he was asleep. Then it escalated. He started commenting on her clothes. "That blue dress is lovely on you. Brings out your eyes." He'd say it as she was leaving for work. The thing is, she hadn't seen him in the hallway. She'd walked straight from her door to the stairs. The only way he could have seen her was by looking through his peephole, waiting for her to leave. A cold knot began to form in her stomach. Her sanctuary was starting to feel like a fishbowl. She started making sure her blinds were fully closed at all times, even during the day. She felt a constant, prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the undeniable feeling of being watched. The silence in the building was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, expectant. Sometimes, late at night, when she would get up to get a glass of water, she would hear a faint creak from the floorboards in the hall, right outside her door. When she'd look through her own peephole, there was nothing but the empty, dimly lit hallway. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Clara came home from work to find a small, neatly wrapped package on her doormat. There was no note. Inside was a box of obscure, imported tea. It was her absolute favorite brand, one she couldn't find in any local store and had to order online. No one knew she drank it. Not her friends, not her family. How could he possibly know? Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a kind gesture. This was a message. It was a violation. That night, she bought a small, motion-activated security camera online, the kind that connects to your phone. She paid for overnight shipping. When it arrived, she set it up on a bookshelf inside her apartment, pointing directly at her front door. She felt a little paranoid, a little foolish, but she needed to know. For 2 days, nothing happened. She started to think she was overreacting, letting her imagination run wild. On the 3rd night, her phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m., emotion alert. Her heart hammered against her ribs. With trembling hands, she opened the app. The live feed was dark and grainy, but the image was unmistakable. It was Mr. Abernathy standing in front of her door. He wasn't knocking. He wasn't leaving a package. He had his ear pressed flat against the wood, listening. She watched, frozen in horror, as he stood there for a full minute, utterly still. Then, slowly, he raised a hand and tried the doorknob. He jiggled it gently, testing it. Seeing it was locked, he didn't leave. He leaned in again, his lips close to the door, and she could just barely make out the shape of his mouth forming her name. Clara. He stayed there for 10 minutes, just watching her door, breathing, waiting, before he finally shuffled back to his own apartment. Clara didn't sleep. She sat on her couch, watching the live feed until the sun came up, the phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. The next morning, she went to the police. She showed them the footage. When they investigated Mr. Abernathy's apartment, they found his secret. It wasn't just a harmless obsession. He had notebooks, dozens of them, filled with pages upon pages detailing every single move she made. What time she left, what time she came home, who she was with, what groceries she bought. He had drawings of the layout of her apartment eerily accurate, with notes on where she kept her furniture. The most terrifying discovery, however, was a set of keys on his nightstand. They were keys to her apartment. The landlord, flustered and apologetic, admitted that Mr. Abernathy had likely made copies years ago from a spare he'd briefly borrowed to check on a leak for a previous tenant. He wasn't just watching her. He was waiting for the perfect moment to stop watching and just walk in. An observer from afar is one thing. The violation is psychological, an invasion of privacy. But what happens when the monster isn't just watching your home? What if they're already inside? Liam and Maya believed they had found their forever home. A charming two-story house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. It was perfect. Their only neighbor was a bit of a mystery. The house to their left was owned by a woman named Eliza. They never saw her. The grass was always cut, the mail never piled up, but the curtains were always drawn, and no lights ever seemed to be on. They figured she was just a very private, perhaps elderly, recluse. The strange occurrences began about a month after they moved in. They came home one day to find a wicker basket on their front porch. Inside was a bottle of wine and a welcome card, signed simply, "From Eliza." It was a nice gesture, a bit belated, but welcome. A week later, a freshly baked apple pie was on their porch. No note this time. A bit odd, but again they brushed it off as a neighborly quirk. Then things started to cross a line. One afternoon, Liam was in the kitchen when he noticed something on their back porch. It was a small, framed photograph. Picking it up, his stomach dropped. It was a picture of their golden retriever, Buster, sleeping on his dog bed. The photo had been taken through their kitchen window, from their own backyard. The feeling of being watched crept in. They started meticulously locking their doors and windows, even during the day. But the gifts kept appearing, and they grew increasingly personal and increasingly disturbing. Maya came out of the shower one morning to find a single, antique earring sitting on her nightstand. It was an old family heirloom, one she had lost during the move months ago. She had torn the house apart looking for it and had eventually given up, assuming it was gone forever. And now here it was, placed neatly in the center of the nightstand. Paranoia began to poison their new home. They started accusing each other. "Did you leave the back door unlocked? Are you playing some kind of sick joke on me?" The house no longer felt safe. It felt compromised, contaminated. Convinced someone was entering their house, they changed all the locks. For 2 weeks, there were no more gifts, no more strange occurrences. A fragile sense of relief settled over them. They started to feel foolish, wondering if the stress of the move had just made them paranoid. The final, horrifying discovery happened by accident. Liam was in the attic, trying to fix a faulty wire for a ceiling light. He was crawling near the eaves of the house, in a dusty, forgotten corner, when his hand pushed against a section of the wall that separated their attic from Eliza's. Felt loose. Curious, he pushed again. With a low groan, a section of drywall and insulation, cleverly cut and fitted, swung inwards. It wasn't a wall. It was a hidden door. The air that wafted out was stale and smelled of dust and decay. Peering through with his phone's flashlight, Liam's heart stopped. He wasn't looking into an attic. He was looking down into a small, cramped space, almost like a crawl space, built between the walls of the two houses. And in that space he saw a sleeping bag, a collection of water bottles, and a small pile of objects. He recognized them immediately. Maya's other earring. A watch he thought he'd misplaced. A set of car keys they'd lost last year. And dozens of other small, personal items belonging to them. The police were called. When they entered Eliza's home, they found it mostly empty, covered in dust sheets. The woman had barely lived there for years. Her real home was the network of crawl spaces and hidden passages she had built within the walls of their house. The investigation revealed the full, sickening truth. Eliza had been entering their home through a hidden panel in the back of their bedroom closet. Security footage they later installed showed it all. She would emerge while they were at work, walk through their home, use their things, sometimes even sleep in their bed for an hour or two. She would eat their food, watch their television, and then, before they came home, she would retreat back into the walls, a silent, unseen parasite living within the heart of their sanctuary. They hadn't just been living next to a monster. They had been living with her. Sometimes the signs are subtle. A misplaced object. The feeling of being watched. But for our final story, the signs were anything but. They were loud. They were rhythmic. And they were seeping through the ceiling. Ethan was a student, and like most students, his budget dictated his living situation. He ended up in a rundown, pre-war apartment building where the walls were paper-thin and every neighbor's life was an open book. Except for the man upstairs. Ethan never saw him. Not once. He didn't know his name, what he looked like, or what he did. All he knew was the noise. It started as intermittent thuds and scrapes at odd hours. Ethan assumed it was just home repairs or someone moving furniture. Annoying but tolerable. But over the weeks, the sounds began to form a pattern. It would always start around 2 or 3 in the morning. A heavy, rhythmic thump, 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 like someone chopping wood. But it was followed by a wet, tearing sound that made the hair on Ethan's arms stand up. Then came the chanting. It was a low, guttural murmur, not a language he could recognize. It was monotonous, a constant drone that vibrated through his ceiling, accompanied by the ceaseless, wet chopping. Sleep became a luxury. Ethan started sleeping with headphones in, but he could still feel the vibrations. He became jumpy, irritable, his grades began to slip. He complained to the landlord multiple times. The landlord was a portly, disinterested man who would just sigh and say, "The guy upstairs pays his rent on time and he's a very private person. Just wear earplugs." Then came the smell. It started as a faint, metallic odor, like old pennies. But it grew stronger, evolving into a sickly sweet, coppery stench that reminded Ethan of a butcher shop left to rot in the summer heat. It seeped through the vents and the cracks in the old plaster ceiling. It clung to his clothes, his furniture, his hair. He bought air fresheners, incense, candles, anything to mask it, but the smell was relentless. It was the smell of decay. The final night, Ethan was up late, trying to cram for an exam, when he felt a drop of moisture hit his forehead. He wiped it away, annoyed, assuming it was a leaky pipe. Then another drop landed on the open page of his textbook. It wasn't water. It was a thick, dark reddish-brown liquid. It smeared on the page, staining it a deep crimson. As he stared in disbelief, another drop fell from a spiderweb crack that had formed in the ceiling directly above his desk. That was it. The noise, the chanting, the smell, and now this. He didn't scream. He was too terrified for that. He just grabbed his phone, backed out of his apartment, and called 911, reporting a potential crime scene. He didn't know what else to say. When the police arrived, they, along with the now very much interested landlord, went upstairs. After knocking received no answer, they forced the door open. The stench that rolled out into the hallway hit Ethan like a physical blow, and he gagged. The police who entered immediately recoiled. The apartment wasn't a home. It was a workshop from a nightmare. The man upstairs wasn't a killer, not in the traditional sense. He was a taxidermist. But his art was unconventional. The room was filled with grotesque creations. The head of a crow sewn onto the body of a squirrel. The limbs of various animals stitched together into horrifying, chimerical sculptures. They were posed in bizarre, almost human-like positions around the room. The source of the chopping was a large, blood-stained butcher's block in the center of the room. The chanting was just the man, who was found sitting in a corner, muttering to his creations. And the dripping, that was from a bucket of animal blood and preservative chemicals, which had overflowed and was seeping through the floorboards. The police arrested him, not for murder, but for numerous health code violations and illegal animal handling. For Ethan, the distinction didn't matter. For months, he had been living directly beneath a chamber of horrors, listening to its creation, breathing in its decay. He broke his lease the next day. He couldn't shake the feeling that with every chop, with every chant, the madness from upstairs had been slowly, steadily seeping down into his life. The watcher, the resident, the creator. 3 different people, 3 different homes, one terrifying truth. You are never truly alone. And you never truly know who is on the other side of the wall. So tonight, when you're lying in your bed and you hear the floorboards creak in the apartment above you, or you see a neighbor's curtain twitch in your direction, ask yourself, how well do you really know your neighbors?